Hello, everyone. My name is Saba Shabaka. I am a co founder of Black Terps Matter, and today we are presenting the Know Your Rights seminar that we're hosting in collaboration with the Live Movement, Howard University's NAACP, and our very own Hellina Hailu, Esquire. And I am really excited to introduce her but first, to talk about Black Terps Matter, we are an anti-racist coalition at the University of Maryland College Park. We were founded on June 25th, 2020, primarily seeking justice for Lieutenant Richard Collins III, who is a Black man at the University of Maryland, who was at the University of Maryland when he tragically lost his life to an act of white supremacy that actually happened from a student that was going to the University of Maryland. Since his untimely death 3 years ago, we have been working, all of the co-founders individually, to try and make sure that we advocated on his behalf and promote any of the anything that will try and get him justice. And so we were actually able to see in January of 2021 his murderer get sentenced to life in jail. So that is a bit of justice that we were able to see in the time that we were organizing, but that's just one little pinpoint in the spectrum of the continuous work that we have to do. So we like to give out a lot of education and advocacy around a lot of issues, especially that have to do with criminal justice and police brutality. So today we're going to be having Hellina Hailu come talk to us about what we need to know when interacting with the police and in regards to just racial tolerance and everything like that. So please, Hellina, feel free to introduce yourself and everything that has to do with you. We'd love to know about it. Honestly, everything. Please tell us as much as you'd like to.
Okay. Thank you, Saba, and thank you, Black Terps Matter. I am very excited to be here and to share some of my knowledge, some of my experiences working as an attorney. But before I was ever an attorney, before I was ever in this position, I was also a Terp. And I was on campus advocating, I was on campus organizing, I was on campus participating in various student organizations. So I was a member, and I was a member, then president of the Ethiopian Students Association at the University of Maryland College Park. I also served vice president, then president there. Then I went on to, with the NAACP on campus, and I was one of the vice presidents of the NAACP there. And we did a lot of work around establishing an organization, the Black Alliance Network, which I believe still exists to this day, as Saba has told me. And we did this first State of Black Leadership Forum. And then there was a second one while I was still there. And then after that, I graduated in 2009. And the importance of acknowledging leadership, acknowledging empowerment within our community as students of color, using our education and our degrees, right, as and to make change, to become a force of change. And so I'm proud and excited to be here to see that what we were working towards back then is now still going on. It's unfortunate that the issues still exist, right? The issues on campus, the issues of racism on campus, on various campuses across the country, the fact that such tragic things have happened on our campus at University of Maryland. But the fact that the resilience of students like you guys, the resilience of activism is very important. And while we're being activists, right, there's also the fact that we have to also know your rights, because we're functioning in a society that has rules and regulations. And when we know what those rules and regulations are, we're able to use them to our advantage and then empower ourselves to make the changes that we want to see happen. So that's what my hope is here today, is to kind of impart some of that knowledge. I worked as a after law school. I went to law school at North Carolina Central University School of Law and HBCU in Durham, North Carolina. And then I I worked with a small firm for a little while, became a public defender, and then went on to open up my own practice. I had my own practice for about 5 years. It still exists, and I still do have my own practice. However, I've also started to do some work with the federal government. So some new opportunities that came my way this past year. So I am excited to share my knowledge and my experience with you guys, how to interact with the police. What are your rights when you are stopped and searched? Understanding your constitutional rights, and helping you feel empowered is the key, and using that power to advocate for yourselves. So we'll just jump right in. The first thing about knowing your rights is we talk about our constitutional rights all the time. I say these are the three most important when it comes to criminal issues. Of course, the 14th Amendment is also very key, but I'm not going to get into that because I think that deals with another arena. But the Fourth Amendment is the amendment that gives you the right to be free from any unlawful seizures, searches, and warrants. So what does that mean? It means that when you're stopped in your car, it means that when an officer knocks on your door, it means that there must be a reasonable belief or expectation or an actual warrant in order to enter your home, to enter your private property. Car searches are a little bit different and unique, and I'll touch base on that a little bit later. But it basically means they have to have a reason to search you. They can't just search you for no reason. There must be a reasonable belief. But one thing that is used against our communities, especially against Black communities, against immigrant communities, such as Latinos, Asian American, and things like that, there is a problem where people don't understand where that boundary is, or hypersurveillance ends up being an issue, and people are taken advantage of in those moments. So out of fear, people will allow for searches. So once you allow for a search to happen, anything that they find can and will be used against you. So knowing that you have the right to refuse a search. If officers say, hey, can we look through your vehicle? You have the right to say no. So that's one key takeaway that I want you all to remember. Sometimes officers also claim that they can smell the odor of marijuana or smell the odor of alcohol when there may not have been. But now that gives them that reasonable suspicion, and that reasonable suspicion allows them to move forward with that search. So that's another thing to keep in mind. And I'll get more into that a little bit later. The next one is the Fifth Amendment, which says that you have the right to remain silent. You have the right not to incriminate yourself. And if you think that you might get in trouble, you should always plead the fifth. You don't have to say anything, especially when you're being accused of a crime, when you're being accused of anything. You don't have to explain yourself. You don't have to say anything. You can ask to have an attorney present with you. And then there's your Sixth Amendment right, which is your right to a speedy trial, the right to confront witnesses, the right to be notified of what charges are being brought against you. And so we can go on to the next one, Saba. So what are some things that you should keep in mind when you're encountering the police? I know that sometimes in certain situations that it can be in a high emotion moment, in moments whether there's an altercation happening, whether there's you're driving and you're just like, why did these officers stop me? I know I didn't do anything wrong. But expressing that frustration in that moment is not the way to get out of it. That is advice that we always give, that my colleagues and I, we always say, make it to court, make it to that moment where you can fight your case. It is not the time to fight your case in the streets. You need to survive that moment. You want to speak calmly and respectfully. Don't argue. Keep your hands on the wheel. Do not make sudden movements. Communicate any movements you need to make before you make them. We've all been pulled over before, and whenever you are pulled over, not we all, but I mean, anyway, I know I have. So
Me too.
When pulled over, I explain what I'm about to do. Officer, I need to reach into my glove compartment and there's a bunch of stuff in there, but I know my registration is in there. So I'm going to dig through it for a second and I'm going to find my registration so I can give it to you. And sometimes they look at me like, why are you explaining this to me? And sometimes they cautiously watch me as I'm, looking through it. So, over communicating those movements, while they may seem innocent, like grabbing your purse or grabbing your wallet and digging through to get your stuff, while those are innocent movements, you still want to over communicate, because on the other side of it, when we really truly look at it, there are situations where people have done harm to officers in those moments. So just thinking of it in that more human perspective, right? While there are officers that do abuse powers, there are also situations where people have, officers have lost their lives in those moments. So I always say it's better safe than sorry. It doesn't take much extra effort to over communicate. So that's my advice with that. And I practice what I preach when it comes to that. Next slide. So like I said, you want to fight the battle in court. You want to just make it to court. Yes, it's frustrating. Yes, it's upsetting to be accused of something maybe you didn't do, or maybe to be treated with disrespect and to be treated in a way that you did not want to be treated. But when it comes down to it, that battle is to be fought in court, because oftentimes those cases get dismissed. Those moments of discomfort and those high stress moments will end when you get to court and your case is dismissed, because if there is nothing to be holding you for, and if there isn't probable cause for your arrest and sufficient evidence to support the charges being brought against you, the court will dismiss it. So here's something that often happens. That I hear people say, well, the officer said if I just let him search my car, he'll let me go. Or the officer said, just come and talk to me and then you'll be on your way. But the reality is, officers don't have a responsibility or legal obligation to tell you the truth in those moments. They can lie to you. Officers often use it as a tactic when interrogating witnesses to tell them that they actually have witnesses against them, or that there's somebody that's willing to testify against them, and they find that that's not true at the end of the day, but now you've made a confession. So what's presented to court is not what the officer asked you or what the officer told you, it's what you said in that moment. So if you're unsure about the circumstances, and if you think that you're about to get caught up in something, it's better to say, I'd like to wait to answer any questions until my attorney is present. So can officers lie to you? Yes, they can. And there is no consequence under the law until some changes are made. Of course, there are, they can't fabricate evidence and present that to court. They can't fabricate evidence and think that the charges are going to actually stick. However, in that moment when they're interviewing you, those confrontations on the street, those confrontations in the detention centers, officers can say whatever they feel like they need to say. So when you're in a confrontation type situation with a police officer, you want to collect some information so that later, if you were abused, if there's an issue of abuse of power by the police officer, if you were suffered injuries, if there's wrongdoing on the part of the officer, you can take action against those officers, right? So you can take civil action. There are civil actions that you can take against police departments. They are often faced with civil rights litigation against them, with excessive use of force. We see it in the news right now, but it's been an ongoing thing and an ongoing issue. They have an entire department that defends them in these situations. So what do you need? You need badge number, name of the officer, gather facts, take video if you can safely. I always caution people about grabbing their phone and trying to take a video in front of officers, because our phones, they are getting in various sizes nowadays. And so sometimes in that moment, officers use it as an excuse to use force against people. And again, we've seen it happen on the news. This is being, we're seeing these things on live video now. So I always caution people, if you're going to take a video, announce, this is my phone, like whatever you have to do to keep yourself safe. Because again, you want to fight these battles in court. You don't want to lose your life in that moment. And so announce it, or get a friend that's nearby, shout your name to others around you, ask them to record a video, tell them who to send it to, give the phone number of a family member or a friend that they can contact if you're being detained. Vocalize yourself. However, you do not want to fight with the officer or anything like that. So these are safe ways to gather information from the officers. Next slide, please. So I feel very strongly about talking to you guys about plea deals and what happens, because this is where I call it the criminal injustice system starts to take hold. What is a plea deal? A plea deal is when you are offered an opportunity to plead guilty to a lesser charge. So let's say you are charged with assault in the first degree, and you are being told that it could carry a sentence of 10 years, but we will offer you 2 years if you plead guilty to a lesser included charge. Like, let's say it's a felony assault charge, and you are going to plead guilty to a lesser charge of a misdemeanor assault. And you decide, well, I'd rather have a misdemeanor than a felony. But what happens oftentimes in communities that are subjected to over-policing, to communities where, officers are just there looking for something all the time, the likelihood of that person that took the plea deal of getting another charge potentially may go up, right? Like by mere exposure in certain environments, the opportunity exists. And when they come in for their next, and this person was innocent the whole time, right? Like, they just want to get out. Maybe they couldn't make bond. And so they ended up already serving 30 days in jail until their court date, because their family couldn't afford to post a $2,000 bond. And 10% of that is $200. And there are so many people that $200 is a make or break issue. Or even if it's a $100, that if they get a bondsman and pay 10%, it's a make or break issue for them. And if they are sitting in jail for 30 days, and if they're offered a deal where they can get, take this deal, plead guilty to this lesser charge, and you'll go home today. That's what they're offered. Well, that sounds very appealing, because you just spent 30 days in county jail or at the state detention center, or wherever they were, depending on the locality. And you spent time there already. So you want to get out. You want to go home. You need to get back to work. You want to go back to school. You want to live your life, get back to your family. But what happens is you take that plea, you're now convicted of a crime, even though you spent no time in jail. You're rushed through the process. It sounds easy. And then next time, if there's a next time where you are arrested, what happens is you end up being in a situation where you've already built up your rap sheet. You already have a history of convictions. And so the sentencing guidelines will say, if this person has 0 priors, maybe the maximum sentence is 6 months. But if they have 1, it will be 12 months. If they have 2, it can go up 16 months, 18 months, etc. So it increases, we call it sentencing levels. So you don't want to be in a situation where you've now racked up issues or convictions for something that you may have been not guilty for the whole time. So I always say, if you're truly not guilty, sometimes it's better to fight your case. There are moments, and there's been times when I was a public defender and when I was in my private practice, that we push all the way to the very end and the case ends up getting dismissed because there isn't sufficient evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that that person is in fact guilty. The standard of proof in criminal court is beyond a reasonable doubt. That means if there's any chance that that person could be not guilty, they cannot be convicted. Now, a jury is the one that often decides this, and sometimes if it's just a bench trial, the judge is the one that decides this. But ultimately, you have to remember, what are your odds, right? Is there enough evidence? So you want to talk to your attorney about what is the evidence that's in front of me. You want to talk to your attorney about what are the consequences? What are the possible strategies? And find an attorney that is going to advocate for you. It is your right to have proper and adequate representation. This is what is killing our communities. People are rushed through the system, overworked, tired, exhausted. Attorneys that sometimes have their own implicit biases against the defendants, who are not looking at the cases for what they are. And these are the realities that unfortunately, gives public defenders a bad name. But I'm just putting it out there that you have that right to advocate. If you feel like somebody's not fighting for you the way that you believe to do so, you can bring it up to the judge. If you feel like you need to find a different public defender, you can ask for your case to be reassigned. You can ask for a different court-appointed counsel. So these are things that are very key to remember. Advocate for yourself. Use the system to your advantage.
All right. Hey, everyone. We're moving on to part 2 of the Know Your Right event tonight with Hellina. We have left off on plea deals and excited to hear more. So, Hellina, take it away.
All right. Thank you. So I just wanted to backtrack a little bit. As you are listening to this presentation and as you are, taking in this information, understand that this is also strictly for educational purposes. And none of this is to be considered as legal advice for your own particular case. If you do have a legal issue and you are contemplating either a plea deal or you're contemplating your defense strategy, you should definitely consult with your attorney within your jurisdiction. So you want to make sure you have someone that practices in your area that can provide you those legal services. This is, again, just for, I have to give my legal disclaimer that this is not legal advice as to your particular case. This is general educational purposes. And with that, we can go to the next slide. So I ended the last conversation about plea deals a little bit talking about collateral consequences. So criminal convictions can impact academic and job opportunities. It can impact scholarships. It can impact financial aid, voting rights, clearance for federal or private employment. It can potentially be considered when renting a home. It can be considered for qualifying for a loan. It can be considered for a number of different things. And this is why our communities are so drastically impacted. When we talk about social justice, when we talk about issues related to racial justice, when we have more Black people incarcerated or taking plea deals rather than fighting their cases and getting those not guilties when they are not guilty, right? Then across the board, we have impacts of systemic issues. And so this is why taking a piece of knowledge, having understanding that you have the right to advocate for yourself, you have the right to ask for an attorney, you have the right to remain silent, you have the right to refuse a search, and knowing that you have those rights, right, and advocating for yourself will help prevent future negative impacts in these other categories that I was talking about, these collateral consequences. And then also for, people that may have other, whether it be immigration issues, et cetera, those collateral consequences can be far-reaching as well. So just something to take note of when it comes to that. So there's something called a Know Your Rights card. You can use that from they might be available online, but basically politely, calmly saying, please be informed that I am choosing to exercise my right to remain silent. I am also exercising my right to refuse to sign anything until my attorney reviews it. If I am detained, I request to contact my attorney immediately. So this is used in various situations, specifically people that may not speak English or have other impending immigration type issues. They may carry these, right? But For others, the main thing is to, sometimes you have to actually verbalize that you are exercising your right to remain silent, because merely remaining silent, at times there is case law that merely remaining silent is not necessarily an excuse to assume that person is exercising their Fifth Amendment right. However, by saying I am remaining silent until my attorney is present, and also demanding that you be provided that attorney is another key to that. Next slide, please. So there are ways to, when an officer wants to enter your home for a search, if there's a knock on your door and officers say, we want to come in, they need to provide you with a valid warrant, or they can have your permission to enter. So check the warrant, right? Make sure it's signed by a judge. Make sure that it can be a judge or a magistrate judge. Look at the date on the warrants. Look at what it is specifically saying that they can search, because if it is not clearly, specifically stating what it is that they can search, they can't, like if it says search the kitchen only, they can only search your kitchen. They cannot be all up in the bedrooms. Where if for some reason you have, here's an exception, there's exceptions to every rule. If you have a bedroom door open and you have a stockpile of drugs and weapons, and they can see it visibly it's in clear view from the kitchen, and they see it, now they can expand their search based on what they were able to reasonably observe, right? So those are the exceptions to those rules. There are several exceptions, and this presentation might get too long and too detailed if I go into all of them, but that's just one example. So this is where the scope expands. So you can also ask for identification. Make sure it's a police officer for your own safety. You want to make sure that it's not just some random person that's there. And remember, you have the right to remain silent.
I just want to say thank you so much for adding that part about them being able to see things even if they had a search warrant, or like needing to double look at the search warrant. I had no idea. So thank you for making sure to add that.
No problem. And so when officers, when they're coming in to execute a warrant, let them know if there are, if you have elderly grandparents or parents or sick people in the house, somebody laying asleep, a baby in the house, let them know that there are other people there, so that they can be not taken off guard and then try to take action against that person, right? You want them to know that, okay, you're executing this warrant. I see that it's been signed. I see that it's, proper. However, my grandma's in the back taking a nap, so I just want you to know she's there. And this will help alleviate some of those dangerous situations. And again, this is not we've seen this go all the way wrong in the news lately, but it's not a catch-all perfect scenario, but these are ways to protect yourself. And write down what happened as soon as they leave, so that way you kind of can have an accurate memory. Whenever you're taking notes as well, put the date and time of when you wrote the note down. So that way, if it needed to be submitted into evidence, it's something in your present state of mind that you wrote it at the date and time that you wrote it. And that will also be, when it comes to admitting evidence to support your case, that's another thing that you can use to your advantage. So date, sign, time for everything.
Also, that's just like a master note-taking tip that I feel like everyone probably really would thank themselves in like 20 years if they start dating all the stuff that they write down. I know personally, I really appreciate it just from a couple months ago, just like organizing with Black Terps Matter, being able to see our progress. So like dating anything that you write on across the board is a big recommendation.
So let's say an officer stops you in a public place, right? You're either on campus or you are at the mall or you're at the park. Don't run. And the other thing is, ask the officer after they finish asking you whatever they're asking you or whatever the issue is, just say, hey, am I free to go? And so that's that's just something important. I just want to say, like, don't run and double check, hey, am I free to go? Because unless you're being detained, technically you are. But, being mindful of that scenario, because I'm keeping this centered also on safety, right? Like your safety, that you're not trying to run away, you're not trying to escape. Just like, okay, thanks, officer, bye, is a better approach. Next slide.
So I have a quick question with this one. In the case that you say, am I free to go? And they say yes, and it's some kind of he said, she said situation.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do? Like, is it really just their word versus yours? Like, if something happens, or like, God forbid, they shoot you in the back when you're walking away or something,
mm-hmm.
like, do you know what usually happens in those cases?
Well, that's a great question, Sawa. I think that that's one of those scenarios where, you would hope that the officer, as a respect for the badge and as a respect for, like, I just told this person that they were free to go. And then if they take advantage of that opportunity to hurt that person, that would be a serious, like, problem. And it is, like you said, that would be a he said, she said situation. You would hope that there might be witnesses that heard you say, ask if you're free to go, and heard the officer say, yes, you can go. That's a very, like, it would be an egregious abuse of power if somebody did that. And again, in these times, I don't put it past, I can't say it would never happen. Maybe 10 years ago, I might have said, or like having so much access and information out there, I might have given you a different answer, but it would be very unfortunate if that happened. Like, if an officer lied in that moment. I think hopefully that there would be witnesses, and also their body cam videos would be telling as well, as long as they don't turn it off.
Yeah, and thank you for explaining that too, because I think it's important for people to know that it is egregious. Like, it is a complete abuse of power if they do stuff like that. And that's exactly what the laws are for. Like, that's why they have rules. So cool. Thanks for doing that.
They have their body cams now. Sometimes you can tell. I've seen body cam video where officers turn away, not to record whatever it is that might be happening. And so you lose that piece of information when you're defending the case, and it's very clear what it is that they're trying to do. And sometimes you point that out, but then it's harder when that happens. But, like, those things are put in place for the safety of the officer, as well as the safety of the other individuals of the community, of society, so that everybody's held accountable. That's how it should be.
Exactly. That makes a lot of sense. Okay, cool. You said next slide.
Mm-hmm. Yes, okay. Please.
Cool.
Okay. In your workplace, same rules apply. Don't run. This point of, like, making a plan with your coworkers, it's more so, like, you don't want to, if you know that there's something going on, for sure. And this is also, like, more so for people that may have immigration issues and things like that. They might need to make a plan of action in advance, if they know that something is going on. And so, making a plan with your coworkers, that's depending on your own circumstances. But they would have to have permission of your employer to be able to enter the workplace. And then they would also have to, again, have a valid warrant in order to enter, and conduct the search just like they would at your home. Next slide. So in your car is different. Cars are different rules. We spent a lot of time in law school just on cars. So just briefly, though, to stop your vehicle, all an officer needs is a reasonable suspicion. And a reasonable suspicion is a much lower standard than a probable cause, which is what leads to arrest. So all the officer has to do is see, maybe, you swerved a little bit, touched the yellow line twice or three times. Maybe you're speeding a little bit. Now at that point, the officer can stop you. your tags are expired, your light is out, things like that. Now the officer can stop you. You roll down your window, and maybe you were partaking in some substances. Now they're legal in a lot of places. If maybe you were smoking some marijuana in the car, and it might not be illegal, but officers may still use this as a reason to search your vehicle to see if you have more than the allowed amount, right? If over a certain number of ounces, you are not allowed to have that or transport that, because now that would be the transportation or potentially sale of drugs. And so that is, or for distribution purposes, so they can put a distribution charge on you. Or if there's the odor of alcohol, they can now conduct a search, or they can ask you to step out of the vehicle and do a DUI test on you, make you blow into the alcohol sensor, things like that. So the main thing with when you're stopped in the car, do not present false documents. You want to make sure you're providing your license, your registration. Often, I don't see officers often asking for proof of insurance, but hey, if they ask for proof of insurance, then providing that. Don't consent to a car search. If they say, hey, do you mind if we take a look around your vehicle? No. And you'll notice they'll stick their flashlight in and look at the cabin of the vehicle, because they can see that things that are in plain sight could trigger a search of the vehicle. Because if they see a weapon, or if they see what may look like a weapon, then they can conduct a search of the entire vehicle. So that's when, people are step out of the vehicle, sit on the curb, and an entire vehicle search is being conducted. So one, you don't have to allow them to search the vehicle. You can say, no, officer, I don't feel comfortable. And if at that point they feel like they have probable cause for an arrest, they can arrest you, and then they'll impound the vehicle and conduct their search at that point. But legally, you do have the right not to consent. They can only search your vehicle if they go beyond that reasonable suspicion and feel as though there's a high likelihood that they would find something incriminating in there.
I have a question.
Sure.
So with that, I know for me personally, if I were to be asked that, I would never want my car to be searched, even if I know there's nothing wrong, and there's nothing that they could possibly find. So in that case, like, say, if they were to search, there's nothing that they would find. Mm-hmm. Is it better to do that than to say, I do not consent? Because at that point, they may arrest you for that probable cause that they were talking about.
Well, if they're following the law to the T, right, they probably don't have anything. And that's the reason why they're even asking you, because if they really had the reasonable suspicion to conduct the search, they would have already done it without asking you. It's the reason that they are asking is because they don't have a reason to arrest, like, as the law goes, right? Everything, textbook law versus, what is happening in practice and what's happening in reality are two different things. But in reality, if the officer the way it should go is that if the officer feels like they have reasonable suspicion to conduct the search, then they can conduct the search and then arrest you if they find probable cause for the arrest. But if they feel like they're often not asking, if they already feel like they have that reasonable suspicion, they shouldn't be asking, right? Because that means they don't really have anything to arrest you for at that point, and now they're just looking. So, I mean, that's up to you. That's a personal preference, I guess. It's a personal call. If you felt like you'd rather just let them search, but then there's situations where you hear about, officers planting something and saying they found it in the car, and it wasn't in the car. It's because somebody might have dropped it in there. So I think you don't have an obligation to consent to a search, and it keeps you in the best possible situation to say, I do not consent to a search. That's the direction that I would go in. That's because you do have that right. That's when we talk about what are your rights, like, you have that absolute right not to be incriminated in that moment.
All right. Thank you.
No problem. So again, same rules apply if you're in somebody else's car. Oftentimes the person that is the owner of the vehicle is the one being looked at when you're talking about issues that happen in the car. But I'm not going to get too much into this, but just remember, when you're in someone else's vehicle as well, like, they're the ones that are saying yes or no to the search. But you can also be incriminated for things that person might have hid it under the passenger seat or in the back seat, and that's where you're sitting. There's a weapon there, or if there are drugs there, potentially the risk exists. So my suggestion to, when you're in college, you're riding with friends, you're here and there, sometimes you might want to do your own little peek around the cabin of the car to make sure if something ever did happen, you're not in a situation where you're also going down. So that's just a little tip that I want to give.
That is a great tip. I would like you to repeat it and say it a little louder because I don't think that people heard you.
Yeah, because if you're in the car with your friends, right, or you're in the car with going on a first date, whatever, you're in the car and that person has weapons or drugs in the vehicle and you are stopped. And if that item is near you within arm's reach, the officers can also charge you with the same thing, with possession of a weapon, with possession of drugs, with possession of contraband. That is a possibility. And so you want to look around, you want to double check, do your own due diligence before entering somebody else's vehicle. Because there are some people you just might not want to be in the car with.
And that goes with bottles too, right? Like unopened, is it only unopened bottles or is it open bottles, only open bottles? So if there's any open bottles around and within arm's reach of the driver's seat too, that's not okay either.
Exactly. That all open bottles have to be in the back seat, in the trunk locked.
In the trunk locked. Okay, cool. Thank you.
And so this is what I was saying earlier. If you want to remain silent, make sure you say that part out loud. I'd like to remain silent. And also if you want an attorney, make sure you say, I would like to have an attorney. The moment you start to talk, you have now have given up that right to remain silent. So you want to make sure, if you say, I want to remain silent, and then all of a sudden you start talking about how you were at the 7-Eleven and then you saw somebody do this. And then now you start telling the story of whatever caused you to be arrested. You can't go back to saying, I want to remain silent. You have to re-invoke that right. Same thing with speaking without your attorney. If you start talking before your attorney is present, you have to re-invoke that right and say, you know what, actually, I want to re-invoke my right to have an attorney. Make sure you say it clearly and loud.
Okay, now, quick question.
Mm-hmm.
What about hand signals or hand gestures or something when, if you've already said that, and this is just a one-off question, I guess, after you already said that you'd like to remain silent?
Mm-hmm. What do you mean, if you made a hand gesture?
Yeah,
or nod yes or no?
Yeah, with your head or with your hand, just some other non-verbal form of communication.
For information, you don't want to be nodding yes or no to questions when they're asking you. I would say don't do that because you're potentially communicating the wrong information. They can write down in their notes, the defendant nodded yes when asked whether or not they had the weapon in their pocket. They could say, so that nonverbal communication, while it might not be as effective of a verbal confession, it can still be, I would say don't do it.
Okay. Cool. Good to know.
So I talked about this at the beginning about how the system is designed to taking a plea deal appealing for those that are incarcerated and can't make bail. Bail bonds are a big business, and if someone can't make bail, they may end up taking a plea because they've been sitting in jail. They might accept the conviction and get credit for time served. It seems simple, but it really is not. And so, like I said, those arrests and convictions add up, leading to higher bonds, higher sentencing. And that's applicable across the board. It doesn't matter how minor it is. If it's a petty theft, you stole bubblegum and now you got arrested, and then next time you got in a fight and you assaulted somebody, and then the next time you stole another piece of bubblegum. Now, that's when you see those situations that we hear on the news where people are serving extensive periods of times for what seemed like a really petty crime. It's because it all adds up and accumulates. And now when they're looking at the sentencing guideline, there are prior 5 or 6 convictions. And so somebody's spending an obscene amount of time for stealing some bubble gum. I mean, that's like a very basic example, but another example is when people are stealing baby food or baby formula because of a lack of resources within their communities. And, you know, they might steal that pack of diapers or baby formula, and then they end up accepting a plea deal because they have to hurry up and get home to their baby, to take care of their children. And now you have a conviction. And if it happens again, another conviction, and then sentences and consequences become even greater. So this is again, like, it's a systemic racism, it's a systemic problem, it's a systemic injustice system that ends up occurring. So navigating your way through it is really key. So that's everything I have. If there are other questions, I really hope that I was able to educate you guys, anybody watching this in the future as well, to really educate more so on the fact that you have the right to ask questions, you have the right to ask for an attorney, you have the right to remain silent and say you want to remain silent, and advocating for yourself. If you don't like your lawyer, guess what? Your lawyer works for you. That I tell people that all the time. If you do not like that attorney, if that attorney is not advocating for you in the proper way, you can fire them. Even if it's a public defender, you can tell the judge, this person is not listening to me. They are not advocating for me. I need someone that will listen to me. Zealous representation is important, and it's something that you have a right to. Fair representation is something you have a right to. So these are some of the common mishaps that I have seen in my experience, and I hope the information was useful. Are there any questions?
Well, I want to thank you for especially putting that last part in there. I think that definitely speaks to Black Terps Matter, the reason that we had our first protest, and a lot of the reason that we continue the work the way that we do, and as long as we've been doing it so far, and why we continue to do it, because it is systemic, and these issues were not ones that Black people even created. So while it is not our job to fix these issues, we are here, and it is our duty to fight. So that's what we're doing. And I know that there's a lot of students that are looking to go into like law school, and a lot of students and Black students in public policy that would really be very interested in everything that you said. So I'm going to make sure to send this video out to them and the people in the NAACP. I know Nadia's in a couple of student groups that would probably really enjoy this too. So Nadia, is there anything you wanted to say before we ended?
I just wanted to say thank you so much. I've learned so much from this event. I thought I had a good amount of information beforehand, but there's definitely so many things that I've learned. And we know that knowledge is the key to everything. And that's the one thing that I've gotten from our events throughout this week, is just new knowledge that we can share with people, share with our community as we fight injustice, and just making, our communities, the state, the nation, just a more equitable place. So, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So now, Hellina, if you could please tell people where they can reach you, your email address, your website, your Instagram name. We'd really appreciate that if you're willing.
Yeah, so my email is Hellina@hailulegal.com. So my name is spelled HELLINA at HAILULEGAL.com. My website is hailulegal.com, www.hailulegal.com. Those are the best ways to communicate with me. I'm not that great on social media, but I am I do have an Instagram at hailulegal. But the best way is email or to check out my website, and then there's more contact information there. I also strongly recommend, again, this presentation was specifically for educational purposes, general education purposes. And if you do need specific legal advice, seek out that legal advice. There are a lot of attorneys that will give free consultations, especially for students. There's legal aid, there's the Office of the Public Defender. There are a lot of resources out there, so make sure you utilize them. And then you can also, I'm happy to be a resource as well.
Yeah. Can you tell them what you specialize in?
So my specialty is criminal defense. So at doing, recently things have changed a little bit.
Yes, things have changed.
But yeah, criminal defense.
Or what you focused on in the past, especially like with immigration, everything.
Specifically in the past, I was working in immigration. I'm no longer practicing in immigration, but I was working in immigration. I was working in the cross section where criminal issues cross over with immigration issues. So people that have pending immigration problems and are convicted or charged with criminal charges, and then also direct just criminal defense. And then I also represent businesses, business contracts, business litigation, and personal injury cases. I used to had my fair hand in family law and enjoyed that for a little while, but now we're focusing primarily right now, my practice is on business litigation and on personal injury. However, I do like to be able to do these presentations and provide information, especially when it comes to criminal defense, because that is one of my passions. It is something that I think people need to know their rights. And so, I do still do some consulting, like do free consults, especially like people have just a few questions or need some information. I'm happy to provide that.
And we thank you for that. So make sure to hit her up. Check out her Instagram page. You'll see the journey, because it's been 6 years now, hasn't it, for Husband Legal? So 6 years. So that's amazing.
15. Yep.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
And so that's exciting. And so we're super excited to just see you continue to flourish, especially being that you're from the great state of Maryland, and this is Black Terps Matter, and you're a Black Terp who matters. So just please take this appreciation from Black Terps Matter to you, and we'll definitely see and talk to you soon.
Thank you. I'm really proud of what you guys are doing. I'm glad to be right here in the great state of Maryland, to be in Prince George's County, and to, be here and to support the struggle and the advocacy and the growth of the organization.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching. Make sure to check out our What is Black Terps Matter webinar Q&A that's happening tomorrow. Same time, same Zoom link. So good night, everyone. Thanks, Alana.